All right, I pressed the button and we are live and as unprepared as always. So today's kind of dare I say, special episode. Let's say a special episode. A once in a lifetime opportunity. Even more so than the last time that Mike and I had a little intimate session on React server components. Even more special than that. Geez, there goes my audio. You guys should let me know. I still need to fix the audio thing. Please let me know in the comments how I can fix my mic. So we have someone new here as well. You might notice. So Andrew, and Andrew, kind of, I'll let you introduce yourself. But
the sound went way down.
No. Okay.
I'm just going to do this every time it happens.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. All right. Here we go. All right. Let's do this thing. So Ben and Andrew actually are here to talk about something cool and open source that they just released. And we thought that it might be a good idea.
Skulk, maybe I'll just jump
yeah,
in
like
there.
I think the universe wants Ben to take over. So Ben, I'll give it over to you. You do the thing.
Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, Skulk. All right. Hi everyone. You know me as Mr. Talks Too Much, but today I'm going to be talking a little bit less. Operativa, as I've said in the past, like, we're a platform company. What platform means to us is enablement for teams that have found product market fit. So generally for product market teams that have found product market fit, the tech that enables them to commercialize the apps they've built up until then, all the technology they've built up until that point. Now, historically, we've seen a very large focus on Node as a runtime, a server-side runtime, and over the last probably 5 to 8 years, a big growth in TypeScript. When we're working with these technologies, where we feel the most pain is everywhere. But when people say things like bundlers are broken, or ESM-CJS is a problem, or code modification is a problem, like targeting different things, those are all very well-known problems and things that are actively being worked on. I mean, like, if you look at bundlers, we're really, really excited to see the movement in that space. I mean, even inside of the last month, there was a Rust-based binary that can compile with, I believe, Rollup, or is compatible with the Rollup API. Things are being done in a lot of places. Now, another place where it hurts a real lot on the server side in JavaScript, not runtime, specifically Node, is data access. Now, I mean, the last 4 or 5 years have seen some great new entrants into the space. I think I specifically want to shout out Prisma, and I want to shout out Drizzle. They've really been making really big moves. And then we have some providers, infrastructure providers, people like PlanetScale, that ship their own drivers with nice user interfaces and better UX than the base Node runtime drivers. But there's different target audiences when you talk about data access layers, especially towards relational databases. There's kind of the ORM camp, and I'll use a string builder to build SQL and all those things. But even inside of that, you have to look at what these people are building. Like, are you building a dashboard that predominantly accesses data? Are you building an e-commerce site, or are you just doing a CMS? where we tend to spend most of our time and the teams we're helping the most do line of business work. So think your back office CRUD applications with some really crazy lookups and constraints, and a lot more writing than reading of data. But also when it comes to reading, it's either super simple, select some things from a table, join 3 tables, get the data out, or it's should be an OLAP query, but happens to be going to a SQL database. There aren't right now, in our opinion, very ergonomic solutions in the space for those kind of teams. Doing those more, I hesitate to say enterprisey workloads. I prefer saying line of business workloads. And we thought that sucked. So over the last year or so, we've been working with Andrew, who's on our call here. Andrew is head of developer experience at Operativa. And he'll do his own introduction of what his background is and why he's uniquely positioned to kind of answer some things. We wanted to take this quite seriously, in that it's a busy space right now. There's a lot of people building data access tooling for TypeScript and for JavaScript runtimes. We didn't want to be adding more. I don't want to say it's noise if someone contributes something, but we didn't want to add more contention. So we wanted to come out with high signal, high value, and focused solutions. And part of that process is looking at prior art, right? And not just looking at prior art, but really understanding what the things are you're trying to solve. So prior art is also just not inside of our little world. We live in a polyglot world. So we looked at things like Diesel and Rust. We looked at Ecto in Elixir. We looked at Entity Framework in .NET, and then I won't even get into the Java ones. Let's just say Hibernate and make half of the people on this call chill for a second. And we wanted to take from kind of the experience of established solutions in other spaces, and focusing more towards our main audience, which is line of business teams. So the predominant inspiration for our work comes from Entity Framework in .NET. But I believe I've waxed enough philosophy here. I'd like to hand over to our head of developer experience, Andrew, a core contributor on Verse, to talk to us a bit about Verse and what it is, what we've been doing, maybe show us a little bit of code, and lead the way. Thanks, Andrew.
Before that, can I maybe just jump in, because apparently, so you might have seen me and Mike typing furiously while you were talking, like in a Slack DM, trying to fix my mic. Oh no! Okay, Mike, it didn't work. We'll try something else. But so, like, do you want to share a link, just so people can like have a look?
Yeah. Documentation at verse.operativa.dev. I'll share a link and then you can share it.
Okay, I'll put it in the comments quickly. Okay, cool. I'll do that. Cool. It's all yours, Andrew.
Okay, cheers. So yeah, hi, I'm Andrew. So my story is I've kind of moved to South Africa from the States almost 18 months ago. So that was like a family thing, just for a different lifestyle after COVID, and kind of reassessing, where I wanted the family to be. But what I was doing in the States was I was actually working at Microsoft on the EF core team. So I started there in 2008 and kind of caught the tail end of the legacy Entity Framework Classic. And then like in around 2012, Microsoft had a huge push to try and modernize .NET. So that was called .NET Core. And as part of that, they rebuilt like their web stack. They rebuilt the runtime. For people who don't know, that was actually based off Silverlight. So they took Silverlight and they turned that into .NET Core. And then we also did Entity Framework Core. So that was a complete ground up file new project rewrite of that stack. Trying to be more lightweight, more cloud oriented. So focusing a lot on scalability. So yeah, that was a pretty big effort, but it was pretty successful. So right now in .NET, like EF Core is like the de facto way to access data if you want to have a kind of richer object modeling, OR mapping like experience with LINQ as well. So that's language integrated query. Obviously, there's people that like to use what's called micro-orms, things like Dapper. So those, it's more lower level where you're writing the SQL by hand. So yeah, I have a lot of experience sort of in that area of rich ORMs. Like you're not wanting to necessarily write SQL, although you can, and you're really wanting to focus on kind of modeling your business logic problems and sort of putting the database to the side and not worrying too much about it unless you have to. So you can solve business problems, and then if you need to drop down or you need to tune something, that the tool should give you that flexibility. So that's sort of what we tried to do with Verse, is kind of combine like the idioms and elements of like JavaScript development, TypeScript, with some of the ideas from things like Hibernate or EF Core. So some of those kind of design patterns for data access. Yeah, so that's sort of the background. I think you guys want to see some code?
So yeah,
we'll ask some questions first. That's fine.
Test number 2. I see a red lock icon, Mike. So I think we've done it. So like, well done on Verse and all of that. But guys, Mike and I have like done the technical feat of the century and fixed my mic. So
well done.
I'm sorry that we're going to steal
all you needed was someone called Mike to help with the mic.
Effectively
This is no longer going to be the Verse episode. This is going to be the episode with Skulk fixes his mic. So I think like I would really like to take a step back, because there might be people who might be listening to this who might have heard a lot of words now and have no idea what any of that mean. So if we were to kind of really simplify the thinking here, and Ben, I'm just going to talk and then I'll leave it up to you and Andrew to correct me where I'm misunderstanding. And granted, I've actually played around with Verse as well. I got it working very nicely with Neon, which was really cool. Because I use Neon, which is a serverless Postgres kind of thing. And it's also what powers Vercel's KV, also powers Hasura. So it actually plays very nicely with Neon. But so correct me if I'm wrong. So when we're looking at Verse, kind of like you're kind of in this space of like your Prismas or your Drizzles, correct? It would make sense to put it within that category.
Yeah, so we're
more in the
a
Prisma
data
space, right?
Yeah, more towards the Prisma space, but we're trying to do different things. I think traditionally you can call us an ORM. But what we're trying to do is a really great user experience on the query side and static analysis throughout everything, enabling much better developer tooling, things like query rewrites and code mods and introspections and all of that. That's coming. But when it comes to manipulating data, I've got some huge object graph in memory and I need to persist that to a database. If we look at how this is commonly happening on JavaScript runtimes right now and what JavaScript and TypeScript code looks like, you're writing reams and reams and reams and reams of code to manage your constraints and your take object graph to put it into the database. Just to do the most simple things for like a many-to-many relationship or some 2-3 step far thing. We allow you to just party on Andrew's word, party on objects, commit them, and Burst figures out how to persist, and gives you a lot of integrity that you might not otherwise see. It's still good to understand data modeling. It's still good to understand like trade-offs and constraints and integrity. But we've got a different audience, I believe, for what we're targeting, and I'd like Andrew to maybe talk to that a little bit as well. So he's got the DX in his title, and I've just got the TO.
Yeah, I mean, there's overlap. There's overlap between all of these approaches and all these frameworks. So Type ORM, Typeorm is another one that's got some of the same stuff. So, we're just focusing on what we think is a nice user experience in TypeScript. So obviously we want to have static typing through our domain objects all the way through, the querying, the updating, everything. Sometimes frameworks, you will lose some of that if your query gets too complex, for example. A lot of them use like a sort of a specification builder pattern where you pass in some JavaScript object to kind of tell the query method what you want back. For those familiar with Link or .NET, ours is much more like that. So it's a composable pipeline style Fluent API where any of the operators can be used at any time in any order, and we will figure out how to generate a nice looking SQL query for that. So the query side is super powerful, just because it's very easy to use and very composable. Like Verse doesn't care what you do in it, as long as it's valid in TypeScript, then the query will work. And then, like Ben was alluding to, we use the unit of work pattern on the update side. So that's very common in enterprise ORMs like EF Core, Hibernate, and that's all about just saying, I have some business transaction I want to do, and it's usually going to involve multiple writes or a bunch of different tables, and there's dependencies between those tables. There's things that need to happen, like keys, IDs need to be generated and copied into the child tables, and we have these relationship things going on. So what unit of work does is it sort of figures out the order of operations in a set of changes and then applies them like transactionally. So you make changes to your in-memory objects, and Verse tracks all that, and then when you call commit, it says, hey, there's 3 updates to customer here, and he's added 6 orders, and now we've got to go off and write this audit record. And all of that sort of is done as part of one logical unit of work inside a single database transaction normally. So those are sort of the higher level user experiences that are common in other data access stacks on other platforms, for example. That's sort of like the main way you work.
Well, I think we lost you there at the end, but for like a second. So okay, and maybe just lastly from my side in terms of just setting the scene, because I'm cognizant of the fact that like kind of this is mostly like a JavaScript focused kind of space here. So I just want to make sure that people who aren't that into kind of the DB space have enough context to be able to actually follow the examples and stuff that you're going to show. But so I think like, so if it's fair to compare it to something like Prisma or so forth, I would be curious, and this is just me asking, like just personally, I would be curious where you would think someone who's at the moment using something like Prisma, where like Verse might actually be like a nice fit for them, and also where Verse won't be. I think like also to be fair to Prisma as well, Prisma also does a lot of other things like really well. So I'm curious, because obviously you guys didn't set out to build a Prisma competitor, because I think like all of us already are inundated, and we don't want more work for us to create more work for ourselves. So obviously there's a specific need that you guys had when you built that that's not currently being solved by something like Prisma. So I'm curious, yeah, in short, like where would like Verse actually be a better fit compared to Prisma, and where would Prisma generally be a better fit?
So, just a point of clarity, right? Like Verse is an experimental package right now.
Yes.
We had some very specific problems that we've been seeing in industry over years and years and years. Predominantly around real end-to-end type safety and how persistence works. Those are the two main things. And when I say type safety, I really mean static analysis, because it's not just about compiling, it's about your language server, it's about your ability to change code with confidence. As Andrew mentioned, it is reasonably common right now, especially when working with the drivers directly or some layers on top of them, to lose type information at some point in non-obvious ways. So you add some kind of conditional to a where clause, you start grouping, you start joining, you do something to your query, and what it spits out is an any. That's a really, really big problem for a lot of teams.
Or an optional, sorry, one thing I've seen a lot as well is it's just like optional types all the way. And that's kind of useless. If something, if mostly everything can be there or cannot be there, like kind of at some point you just need to manually override the types all the time.
Yeah, so principle of least surprise is important, right? So if you create an interface that makes developers expect types to come back from something, and they do something non-obvious that suddenly gives them an any or an unknown or whatever, they're not going to expect that. And the way that structural typing works, and especially the any type works, it's going to be non-obvious until something breaks in production on runtime. So we do a lot to ensure that there's always complete type information. There might be some edge cases we've missed. Nothing's ever perfect, especially as long as any is a thing that exists. But we do a lot, and we will talk about projections in our selectors, and there's nothing I know of, and Andrew can correct me here, that you can do with a verse query for it not to spit out like a proper type for the thing it's giving you back. And not just at that point. If you're chaining things, it's a monad, so don't think of it as top to bottom, but if you're building on top of the monad, you get correct type information everywhere. In your where clause, you're not writing an object, you're writing actual TypeScript with operator overloads, all the things you're used to, and type safety. So if you check a string column against a number column and don't specify a conversion, which some drivers require, you'll get a compiler error. Which you get to varying degrees with all of the current solutions and everyone currently in this space, and everyone's improving on it day by day, but there's a fundamental architectural design decision that has to be made in how that interface is built, and Andrew can talk more about that. It ends up being a monad for us. Other people can have different solutions. So type safety is the one big thing. And the second thing is persistence. I don't want to get a well-defined object structure out of my data layer, make changes to it, and then it doesn't know how to persist the object graph it just created itself, right? So if I query a company with a list of employees, and I make a change to employee number 8 and I remove employee number 3, I should be able to just save, just persist the objects I have. There isn't a good solution for that right now, and Verse does have a solution for that. It's not going to be perfect, we're experimental. but we can eliminate reams and reams of error-prone code and make developers focus on the problems that are important to them. Every dev shouldn't have to know the idiosyncrasies of how to take a many-to-many and persist that safely, calculate the deltas, ensure constraints are met, all those things. It's important for every dev to be exposed to that and have an understanding, but it doesn't have to be like top of mind information for everyone forever. With what currently exists in the JavaScript runtime ecosystem, you have to. And we want to make that not a thing, not a necessity. I want to make that clear. I think it's very important that any developer who works with data spends some time understanding what these things are and how to work with data. I recommend Designing Data-Intensive Applications. It's a really good book to read on that. But they shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be blocking people, and you shouldn't be having to write reams and reams and reams of code to do basic stuff. Sorry, Andrew?
No, I mean, I think that covered it. I mean, we all use lots of different frameworks because they help us to do our job faster and better and do things that we don't want to re-implement. So I always say, like, if you have a kind of a non-trivial app and you're not using an ORM, then you've written a mini ORM in your app. I mean, if you're trying to actually, dry up your code and have common ways of doing querying and saves and stuff, usually there'll be some plumbing framework code that you end up triangulating into in your app that handles that for your specific patterns, data access patterns that you have. So that's sort of like all these frameworks are trying to do, is just say, hey, we can help you to solve your business problems quicker by like not forcing you to kind of solve a bunch of these already solved problems. Like eager loading is one I always use as a classic example. So there's different strategies for when I want to load related entities. I could use left outer join fetching. I could use multi-query. So those are things that an ORM typically supports as configuration knobs and not forcing you to figure out how to write two queries and stitch things together when they're coming back. And then a lot of focus is also on performance. So how to do that efficiently, like for example, all of Verse's querying APIs are sort of async streaming. So as long as the underlying database driver supports it, which they all do for the ones we support. And so by default, you're just enumerating records, entities. You're not even buffering unless you call to array, and then you're going to buffer into memory. So, we have a centralized place where we can say, hey, this is a common hot path for apps. It's like transferring data from the wire into their objects. We're going to spend a lot of energy trying to make that efficient. Same with updates. Like we haven't done this yet, but one thing we will do is like update batching. You've made a bunch of changes in memory. Well, which ones can we kind of send together in one database call? And then often that's configurable. It's like, oh, I want my batch size to be 10 or 20. And so maybe my app's doing this big data chunking thing where it's like chewing through hundreds of records. And so you can kind of tune things that way. So these are all just kind of out of the box features you get with, rich, mature data access frameworks that just allow you to sort of focus on your application and not on all of the kind of plumbing that you need to do to be efficient when talking to like these data stores.
I was trying to find the unmute button. Cool. Yeah, I think we can you can maybe show us some examples. I also appreciate the fact that I'm trying to keep it accessible, and Ben just straight up went monads, like out of the gate. Like he invoked the monads. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's cool. One thing though, it's also worth mentioning is that this is also like a very like kind of developing. I think you did mention it, Ben, but it's still very much a developing space. I mean, like, so we spoke about Drizzle. And how old is Drizzle? Is Drizzle even older than a year now? So yeah, it's there's a lot of ferment and there's a lot of movement in the space. Cool.
Yeah, and you get that a lot
yes.
on other platforms. It's sort of a very I would say opinionated space. So a lot of different people have different ways that they like to work here, and some people are lower level, and that's fine. They want to write SQL, so that's completely fine. It's sort of like a slider that you can choose where your abstraction level you're comfortable with is. So I don't know if there's an analog of this for front-end frameworks. I'm not too familiar with them, but are there ones that do more and do less, and you kind of decide where you want to jump in on that spectrum?
Yes. Yes. Let's just say yes. I'm going to make a lot of people angry if I make claims about what is closer to the metal than something else. But I think where it's not the same is because it's just that working with the DOM directly sucks. Period. So you're always going to have some type of abstraction if you're working in a team. If you're some solo guy YOLOing something, by all means. But yeah, cool. Ben, I don't know if you have anything you want to show, or Andrew, or you want to share your screen, or
yeah, I think we've just hit the half-hour mark. Let's give the people code.
Give the people what they want. They want to see the code. Yeah, I don't know if either of you guys want to.
GitHub star, all the YouTuber things.
Smash that like button. Nice, Mike. I didn't even know you could do that.
Mike.
Oh, what? Wait. Sorry, I'm getting distracted now. Wait, where do you do that? Oh, there's
the top right corner on the Mac.
Oh my word! There's music and stuff. I didn't even see this. Sorry. It's audio drops and stuff. Okay, let's get into this. Yeah, so Andrew, tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, so is it big enough? Can everyone see okay?
Might need to zoom in just a little bit more.
Yeah,
that should be
more legitimacy because Andrew uses IntelliJ.
Yeah, man. Old habits die hard.
That's why I didn't want to zoom in. It's look at this nondescript this nondescript IDE I'm using.
It's a continued battle. I keep trying to tell them to use Emacs through VS Code through Emacs, but WebStorm seems to be productive enough.
Yeah, it's another one of those fertile areas, right? Editors. There's all these new editors coming out, these Rust-based ones and all this stuff. So AI-based ones. So I guess we're going to see a lot of innovation in that area. But yeah, I just need to be able to debug a test. And so as long as I can do that, I'm happy.
He's a simple man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so there's the first part in kind of any of these high-level ORMs is that you have this idea of a model. You could also think of it as your schema. That's a bit more of a relational concept, but your model is really just a bunch of metadata that tells the framework about kind of what entities you have, what their properties are, and how those things can map to your backend. So one thing you get a lot with kind of rich ORMs is the schemas can vary, right? So you can have names for things in your TypeScript code, and then your column names can be different, for example. This is just one simple example of kind of a bunch of the problems that are solved. In the extreme cases for things like EF Core, your tables don't even map to your entities potentially. So you can have multiple entities coming out of one table, or you can have multiple tables producing one entity in memory. So that's what we sort of call advanced mapping or more complicated mapping. So that's what the model's for. And so we have an API where you can essentially, for those familiar with Zod or something like that, it looks pretty similar. You can call this entity function, and then there's an object here where you can set up your properties. And then at the end of it, there's a builder that you can use to add further configuration. So this is where we're getting our types from, and that we're going to use later on. And then this is where we're going to set up things like what table I'm going to here, or what identity generation strategy I'm going to use. So I could be using, identity columns, like auto incrementing columns, or I could be using a sequence, or I could be using something called sequence high-low. So that's where there's one sequence in the database, but the client will occasionally query that sequence and allocate blocks of IDs so that I can pre-allocate integer IDs on the client. So those are other things that an ORM gives you, is a lot of kind of power with respect to the strategies you use for these things. So we're creating a model here with album, artist, and then so we have these two entity types. Then we just need a top level object, which is we get by calling the verse function. So this is very similar in other frameworks. Like if you're in Prisma, for example, you might have like a top level object. And this is really just stitching together some configuration and setting up the model. So here we say we're using SQLite. I'm setting up a special kind of logging here where we'll get nice logging output, and then telling verse about all of these model objects that I created. And so this is just normal code, right? So I could have inlined these things as well. I could have just put them here. So this is kind of a matter of taste, and kind of the complexity of your model is like how you want to factor it. Do you want to split these all out, have them in different files, or put them all together? That's sort of up to you. So that's all we've needed to do there. Now I can go ahead and just run a query. By the way, this Chinook SQLite is an existing database that you can get off GitHub. It's kind of a cool sample data set that has a bunch of like music store data in it, albums and artists and things like that. So we have our top level object. It has this from property on it. And once I use that, I'm basically accessing all of my sets. These are my sets. So these are just names for the full sequence of artists in the database, or the full list of albums. If you're familiar with EF Core, you can think of these as like DB sets. They're like the root of your query. So if I just essentially didn't do any of this other stuff, I would do a table scan and I would get back all of the data in that table. But what I am doing instead is I'm saying from all of the artists, I want to filter them. So this is where we get into our querying API, where we can essentially have what are called query operators, things like where, select, group by, join, limit, offset, most of the things you can imagine that you would need there. And I can write normal TypeScript code with strong typing and like use like proper TypeScript code in my filter predicate here. So this is what
let's say we wanted to check if the album was more than 5 stars. Let's blow a few minds here. How would we update that where clause?
Oh,
the artist. Wrong table. Maybe we'll get to number conditionals and stuff when we get to albums.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you can write any normal TypeScript or JavaScript expression in here. So it can have conjunctions, disjunctions, all of the operators, not equal, greater than. And then we're doing a projection. So a projection here is we're reshaping from the artist object, which we would get by default, into something that just returns the name. So this is like the select part of a select query in SQL. And then we're buffering it into memory with toArray. So we could have also used like a for await loop over this thing directly. And then we would have just been streaming those things into memory and throwing them away. But here we're just buffering it. So
that's like a really big deal for anyone who's ever tried to do like a CSV export of something. That like marshalling serialization cost you pay from going driver in memory, iterate over stuff, put it in CSV. You can, with that for await down there, you can write it as it streams from the database to other IO.
My mind is just still blown about being able to use JavaScript and not having to write GT or EQ. That is awesome.
Yeah, so for example, that where clause, you could go a.name instead of .like a dischargeable like there. You could do double equals Andrew or whatever, right? So as you've seen on line 56 there. So famously, JavaScript and TypeScript don't have operator overloads. We found a way to make this work. And it's a little bit more of an advanced topic, so we can discuss that on the another day. But you can do conditional logic and stuff here as well, so you can get ands and ors and everything to expand that predicate with type safety. So if the name column isn't a string and you can't compare against a string literal, you get a compile time error, which is this is where the value should start becoming clear to some people.
That is insanely cool. Like, I should probably know about this. But that is epic. My mind is blown.
What I really like about this, and is the same thing I like about Zod, and I'm glad you said the magical Z word, because now I'm on board. But I also like the fact that your schemas are literally just values that you're passing around. It's not some crazy .verse file or whatever. It's literally JavaScript values. And just pass them around, and you can get them from anywhere and then feed them into your initialization or whatever. It's not, there isn't some like crazy machine in the background doing some magic that gets it, and you need to configure where this gets read from in your configuration file or whatever. It's literally just JavaScript values or TypeScript values in this case. I really like that, and that's also one of the big appeals for me with the Zod as well. You could just pass the things around.
So very important in that point. Everything we do at runtime. There is no compile. There is a compile time static analysis on the code you wrote, just like you normally have. But we don't generate any code to make this happen. There is no code generation here. This is all runtime and memory stuff, and our performance is from the limited benchmarking we've done. Our performance is comparative and often better than current solutions. But we will only formally we're going to publish our benchmarking and allow anyone we've benchmarked against to tell us how we use their thing wrong before we make that public.
I'm so sorry to chime in again here. I'm so stuck on that selector thing. So hypothetically, you could have where a.name is double equal to John, or a.name is equal to Steve, like
yes,
just regular JavaScript. That is
so here's cool. A better example. So in this one, we have a parameter coming in, and we can talk about how parameters work in a minute. But essentially, this projector here is a more complicated like expression, right? So we're creating this object, and we have this interpolated string inside it, and then we're doing this calculation. So this is sort of like how I want to be able to program, because I want to be able to just like write normal code in the idioms of my language that I'm using.
Declaratively, yeah.
Yeah, and just like use all the things.
Run that test. Just show us the output SQL
on
the right.
It's this output I have. Here's one I prepared earlier. This output here. Yeah. So you can see that like this is like a select statement you would write by hand for this, right? It's doing a server-side string concatenation to build this interpolated string. So it's like folding in the value of a.title, and then it's also returning the artist ID, and then it's doing this calculation on the server. So it's translating the client-side expressions to SQL, and we spend a lot of effort on making this SQL look really nice, because you want to be able to see what your app is doing and understand what it's doing.
Yeah, you can probably do some even more abstraction by using proxies in some interesting manner. But yeah, I'll maybe even play around with that a bit.
So maybe a few more, like just before we get on to other parts, we can talk a little bit about composability and sort of the fact that you can, like Ben was alluding to, the type flows through the query. So if you imagine you had a normal JavaScript array statement where you were doing map and then reduce and then filter and then other things, the type sort of flows through that thing, and then at the end of it is what you get. That's the same here. So if we do a join, the next operator is now dealing with, not only the original track, but the album, because now we have two things that came out of join. One went in and two came out. So that's kind of like, that's what we expect to see here. Now we've got like the track here, the album, and the artist. And then we could like filter on that, and then we could select from that. So it's sort of an example of you could just keep stacking operators and the types will just always be right. And so you just keep programming against kind of like your application in the way that you would if it wasn't like a database app.
Are the types aware of that string concatenation that you showed in the last example?
Yep.
It's just normal TypeScript, right? So
just normal TypeScript, right?
Yeah, so it's whatever the language server thinks.
No black magic involved.
All those crazy TypeScript like thought experiments that Ben has been posting on ZA Tech over the last 5 years have finally paid off.
Been doing 360 flips here.
But it's the same with like it's the same with like Zod as well.
You don't ever want to hover over anything, because then that's like a downfall of TypeScript. It just, you have to do a lot of funky stuff to make it work, but then like that funky stuff is sort of exposed in certain places, right? Unfortunately, but like where it really helps is like when you're dotting and stuff, because like then you just get the stuff you should get.
Yeah. And I'd like to make it clear, while a lot of TypeScript research and contribution has happened from me in the past, this is predominantly the work of Andrew with me in a supporting role. The whole Operativa team has contributed to this, but our core contributor is Andrew.
So sorry, Skulk, you were going to say something?
No. Like I actually wanted to ask. So we have about like 15 minutes left. So if you want to get into like an example of kind of the unit of work stuff.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Because I find that like really cool as well. And like I've been doing a bit of a local first kind of like Kool-Aid drinking episode the last couple of months. So it would also be interesting for me to see if there like is some integration there as well. Because like if there's some local like some client side stuff you can do based on that unit of work thing.
Yes, we don't really have any story for the browser, if that's what you're talking about, but it's definitely something like Dano has talked about as well. So that sort of brings in the idea of like remote objects and marshalling and how to kind of move, state across the wire. But what we have at the moment is like if you're in a server action or a server component or something, you essentially can pull this unit of work UOW function. So think of this as creating like a bucket or like a session or like an interaction that you're going to have. This is just going to track everything you do that is related to this unit of work. And so then I could just, if I want to insert something, I could like new up a new to do here. The unit of work also has these sets, just like the from method we saw when we were doing querying. And you can also query from the unit of work. So that's like a big difference to talk about. When I query from the from method, I'm not tracking those objects. I purely want to read them. And so it's more efficient because we don't track anything. It's purely a read operation. When I can write the exact same query on this set here of the unit of work, all the same operators are available. But now this unit of work it kind of sees the entities as they come out of the query and it tracks them. So you can think of it as just attaching to them. And like you said before, it could have been a proxy, but we're actually just keeping some state about everything that you queried so that when you make changes to it, we're going to know what went on. And then I'm just going to commit. It's going to create a transaction and write an insert. So it's like the simplest hello world example. We could probably get into something a bit more complicated. I'm just going to make some more space here. So here's an example of creating a new customer, adding it, saving it to the database. I still have the thing in memory. I haven't finished my action yet. I realized the name was wrong. I set it to Microsoft and I called a commit. So this is like doing an insert and an update. And here's where we can say, oh, I want to see what state was in the database now. I'm going to bypass the unit of work. I'm going to go straight to a no-tracked query and pull back the thing with that ID. And then I can check that its name was indeed updated. So Cascade, you can do things like this as well, where what's a good example? So I could add an order here. Another thing that I think we called out a little bit is that versus managing the IDs for things as well. So if you're using an identity generation strategy that doesn't require writing to the database to get the ID, then you'll get an ID. So that can be useful. Another good example of that is the UUID strategy that I didn't mention that we support. Then I could query an existing customer. I could set the customer ID of the new order to the existing customer ID, and then I call commit. And now something interesting has happened. Because this customer has a collection of orders, that order has been put in there. It's something we call fix up. So it's sort of like making sure that your in-memory view of the database is synchronized with the current state of the database. Cascading deletes is another thing you want to be able to do, like reparenting. So lots of just different data interaction scenarios where you're making changes to multiple objects and we're coordinating how to write those changes and synchronizing things that need to happen in memory. I'll stop there for reactions and questions.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, Mike, Xander, whether you have anything on your side?
Meaning to play with this because I did have early access and I have played with it a little bit, but I haven't been able to give it a fair shake. So I'm gonna not say anything and just be hyped, and I'm sure I'll have more opinions over time.
Yeah.
It'd be terrible to use an experimental package in production, but Connects is really hurting me, and this looks really.
No, so I actually read a thought-provoking article recently. Let me see if I can find it, which was about, so you want to build a framework. Framework. Where was it? Let me just look at my history. Search history, most recent.
You want to share your screen?
In a second.
While we wait for Xandor, how well is this stuff documented? Because like there's a lot.
We are working on it. So
it's an experimental JavaScript package. So that means anywhere from a markdown file with the repo that it was cloned from's content still inside of it to a little bit of effort.
Does it have the two most important keywords?
It has the fish emoji in the documentation.
I was hoping for blazingly fast.
Like I said, our benchmarking at the moment indicates that we perform very well. We aren't going to be publishing that benchmarking until we've given the people that we're benchmarking against the opportunity to update their code or tell us the implementation we're using is wrong.
Look, I'm going to go ahead and make that PR.
Yeah,
Put a
anyone
bunch of fire
can,
emojis as well.
anyone can
And tag like all the big names in JavaScript,
we do
like
have a
at
code of
at
conduct.
Avenue and
Yeah. So contributions are welcomed and encouraged. There is a code of conduct, and conduct. We are Apache 2 licensed. If anyone ever wants to understand why Apache 2 and not MIT, please ping me on ZITech, email me. We can have that conversation. It's ultimately to ensure the integrity of the package, right? Like MIT means other people can pick it up and do whatever they want. Apache to a level as well, but it's about integrity.
Okay, I found the thing. So let me present share screen.
Oh,
and it
sorry,
might.
one more question. Migration stuff.
There is a CLI. There is a CLI, and you can generate migrations for your entities. The CLI has docs on itself, so you can -- help on the CLI, and there are at least some basic examples in the repository of how things work.
And if you need to like manipulate some data in a migration, say now your stuff is a mess, is that possible?
Yes, yeah. So that we have the migration is basically similar to other migration systems. So you have a code file that you can essentially put in a bunch of like fluent operations that are basically analogs of DDL or DML ops. So we have APIs for insert, select, update, delete. Well, not select, but insert, update, delete. And then all the DDL stuff like create index, create table. So that's sort of where we've built the minimum thing that we think will work, but we're kind of open to improving that. Like one place where we would improve migrations is like diffing, so that when you generate a new migration, we can scaffold what we think the changes are that you have made to your model. Maybe you added a property to the customer, and we would scaffold and add column. So that's kind of more advanced, but it's sort of on the roadmap.
Yeah,
That sounds like
so
quality of life, though, right?
Yeah, migrations are where we spent the least of our effort at the moment, and the most experimental section. We have made some interesting choices there that we'll leave up to issue creators and Discord enjoyers to complain about, and we can have the conversation and find the best route forward. But right now, that's not where we want to be adding the most value.
Look, I'm not asking selfishly to try to use this instead of Connects at work. I'm just curious, you know. The only thing we need Connects for is migrations, isn't it?
Definitely have a low risk project that I'm going to start using it on.
Well, so what this article says and why I liked it so much is it very definitely says you should probably not use it for a low risk project, because you wouldn't really be stress testing it, not just in terms of performance and like stability of the code, but just in terms of like whether it actually meets needs, right? Because low risk projects tend to not have needs that are as demanding. And
yes, but
that does mean that you're taking a risk, right? Of course, but the point is like if you the argument was kind of like if you want to end up building something well, you kind of can't avoid the taking a risk part at some point, and probably sooner than you might feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, but so that is if you're the creator of this.
Oh yeah, no, that's if you're the creator.
I'm not going to take that risk on behalf of Bain.
The important keyword is we are an experimental module, right? That should indicate where you use it. If we solve specific problems for you that can't be solved with another solution right now, then use the experimental module in an experiment, test it, verify it like the engineer you are, and if it works, deploy it. And you should be taking that approach with pretty much any adoption, is trust but verify. That's the one component of what experimental means. The second component, we're going to have the experimental tagline on us as long as there is significant surface subject to change. While we are quite comfortable with our current public interface and some of our fundamental design decisions, experimental means we're putting it out there, we're letting people use it, and if we were wrong about anything, we're going to change it. We believe that at least for the query DSL and the unit of work, there's unlikely to be material changes. There might be some slight changes, and a lot of the problems we're solving are long tail problems, so there will be additions. But if we got it completely wrong, we'll come back with the next version, right? So
Small side note, how good is the type on this particular blog? I just want to say I've been like really impressed. Typography. When people say like typography, especially on the web, like typography is 90% of your design, like it really is.
I'm just so
there's literally
surprised.
Nothing else happening and it looks amazing.
Sorry guys,
Ben's
I have
here
a
saying-
hard stop. I gotta go pick up the boy.
There you
Okay.
go.
It's good chat.
Ben's
Keep talking.
Ben's here
Still
saying that,
think,
if it solves a problem that you've got, you're forgetting JavaScript and TypeScript developers. It's like, ooh, shiny.
Yeah.
So I would encourage any developer to always be curious. I think curiosity is an absolute virtue for not just people in knowledge work, but curiosity is a fundamentally important human behavior. But I would also recommend to people in professional positions that you trust but verify. Verification is a very, very important step in deploying things to production, right? Or even interacting with your colleagues or your anyone. Like, don't do things if you aren't sure they're going to work, if there is a risk profile where that is not.
You're saying I shouldn't be Friday YOLOing.
I believe intuitive thinking is
It's too early to merge.
probabilistic thinking. But I do think that probabilistic thinking has a different risk profile to intuitive thinking. So it's up to what your risk profiles are. But I believe that if you are in a working in a professional capacity, you should verify changes before you impact other people.
Mike, it's way too early on a Friday.
I'm not saying, I'm definitely not saying it's too soon to use this. I'm just saying we couldn't possibly have covered all the bases and everything in the time we've spent on this up until this point.
Yeah.
We might have missed.
No, agreed, but
probably completely covered, but
yeah,
it costs you an evening to convert like a controller action and verify it works and do some benchmarking, and
yeah,
it depends.
That's the
on
thing.
risk
I think we've got
what verification looks like.
It's a new module. We have like 4 queries so far. If there's any time to do it, it's now. And I mean, I can do it over the weekend. Test it, verify.
Yeah. See, that's the thing as well, which is why I'm also thinking of pulling it in, is because like it still maps to existing concepts. So like if at any point I'm like, oh man, like this verse thing is actually malware and whatever, please don't sue me, Ben. That I can just be like, okay, cool. Like it's pretty easy to map it to something else, because at the end of the day, it doesn't abstract the actual what you're doing away. It just actually like polishes some of the hard edges of doing those things that make it harder to read.
It's
and
nice
reason
ergonomic
about.
handle.
Yeah. Cool, but this is a good one. I'm keen to start giving it a bash. I'll let you guys know what I think, like honest opinion.
So
yeah.
little benchmark spoiler. I won't say against which libraries, but the popular ones. If we do a selection of a list of artists from a heavy fat table, and we run a proper benchmark over it, that means a stochastic sample is taken. For verse, we see operations per second of 494. For another very popular, possibly the most popular one, we see 56 operations per second. And then for a other very popular competitor, we see 331 operations per second. We have done no significant work on performance yet. This is just our fundamental design and architecture is putting us at that kind of margin right now.
I am actively typing blazingly fast.
Yeah, I'm keen to also play around with it a bit, see if I can try out. What I'm maybe keen to give a try is see if I can actually map kind of your basic approach to something like IndexedDB or something as well, because that might be really cool. Having some, because it's just an abstraction of querying and whatever.
There's possible worth looking at, but there are some specific runtime optimization things that might make that arduous to do.
Yeah, so I'm not thinking about like npm install verse at client at verse - client or something. I'm literally just thinking it would actually be cool if you kind of have like some overlap in terms of the kind of way you express like querying, whether it's for local stuff or stuff on a server somewhere or whatever. Even if it's literally just copy pasting between files.
We'll do a talk on like how we got operator overloads and stuff working. The stuff you type into the closures inside of wheres and projection selects and group bys, and it looks like TypeScript. It gets compiled by TypeScript, type checked by TypeScript. It never gets run at runtime. We essentially two-string the functions, turn them into AST, and use that AST to generate various things like log and SQL and like performance insights. And like we make an AST. It's basically macros at runtime. But that's maybe a talk in and of itself.
Yes, I think it would be good just to have a chat as well about like kind of the process, just from a product design perspective as well, the process of actually building this thing, and what you kind of learned if you were to do it again.
The same thing I learn every time I touch macros is expressions are really the easiest thing to work with. Lisp was right.
Yeah. All right. Okay, cool. Let's end it there. Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks.
So,
everyone
when
else.
you're moving to Emacs?
I'm an executive now, unfortunately. I just talk to people and write code through
Google Docs.
It's cool. I've got Emacs focused blog post for you written by executives. Like I can send you links. It's cool.
I'm joking. I saw there was like an update to Notepad on Windows. It has tabs now, so maybe I'll use
tabs. I think like 5 years ago they added keyboard shortcuts. It's really blindingly fast development velocity there.
Last fun fact for about 3 years of my professional career, I used to use Comic Sans Mono as my font. So this was in the Sublime Text era.
Do you have dyslexia though?
No, it was just fun.
He just lives a little. Come on, Zano, live a little.
Fun fact: people that have dyslexia generally find Comic Sans a little bit easier to read. Not that it was specifically designed for that, but this is what they found. Having said that, as a designer, if you want to serve such people, there are better fonts out there
Yeah, open dyslexia.
to serve people with
Yeah.
dyslexia. So still no reason to use Comic Sans.
But like
Comic
there's,
Sans is one of the best fonts.
there's an interesting dynamic there insofar that the better it is to read for dyslexic people, the uglier it looks. Because like your letters need to be way more distinct, which means like when you look at the actual text, like
Mhm.
it's not like almost like a white noise. It's like all these chunky things all
not
over
as
the
structured.
place. So
Is
it doesn't
that
have a
also-
texture.
Is that also true for Didones? Like those fonts that are based on Bodoni, right? Because Didones have very, very sharp differences in stroke width, depending on what part of the stroke you're looking for. Like there's like hair thin to like really thick and back. Interesting thing that happened in the 18th century when they first figured out how to make glossy paper. Because until that time,
this
those
bleed,
really thin
yeah.
stroke widths wouldn't transfer cleanly onto the paper.
Yeah, or
So,
it would bleed and it just
Hangul-
looked like regular text. Yeah.
Hangul, which is the Korean writing system, interesting for very, very many reasons, is also like very uniquely distinct and legible and accessible for many reasons.
Yeah.
And also allows you to do pretty interesting things like add scenery. And,
I come from a world where 10 years ago TS stood for typesetting. So yeah. That's my OG.
Not bad. Well,
Someone in the chat has said Oblivion has an Emacs plugin. I think they meant Obsidian.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Most likely.
you got no excuse now.
I actually didn't.
I know Jock is actually Oblivion, like this the Elder Scrolls Oblivion.
Okay.
For real.
Wow.
It's how you cast your incantations.
Although I must say, if you like Obsidian and you like Emacs, you're probably better off with Orogrome than you are with Obsidian, unless you have a whole bunch of existing stuff in Obsidian, of course. Then that makes sense.
Isn't like part of using Emacs signing your sol away to org mode? Like isn't that
Yeah.
required?
It turns out that I am slowly discovering this fact. Yes.
Yeah, org mode's great. I did use Emacs for 1 or 2 years of my life, but then like my beard started growing out, and I still haven't been able to shave it off since it
just starts growing too fast.
Org mode it's so great and so useful, and then you like want to turn it into processes that your colleagues can use, and
that's
then,
where it gets hard.
Yeah, and then you're like C equals CX MX butterfly, and they're like, what?
Yeah.
This is a living nightmare. I'm sitting here in between two guys arguing about Emacs.
We're not arguing
We're
about it.
literally
We're saying
stuck
it's amazing. It's just everyone else that's wrong, and that's a problem.
And on that bombshell, I've got to run, guys. Have a great day.
Fun for life.
No more Emacs for me. I'm done.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Cheers, guys. See you soon.
Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.